The more controversial or more subjective the subject, the large language models really struggle with getting those answers really tight because it's just words plus statistics. When it's trying to answer a question like, what is the gospel? And it's drawing upon sources that say very different things about that, it's going to struggle to be precise and accurate in its response.
Artificial intelligence is no longer a niche theology. It's rapidly becoming a primary way people search for answers about life, answers about meaning, and even God. By 2028, it is predicted that as many people as search Google now will be searching AI, and it will be the new front door for even theological inquiry. Well, our guest today is a good buddy, Michael Graham. First and foremost, he's a friend that I have enjoyed over the years. He currently serves as the executive director of the Keller Center, the Tim Keller Center of Cultural Apologetics at the Gospel Coalition. In that role, he has a chance to shape Christian engagement with some of the pressing issues of our time. He previously served in pastoral ministry and has written and spoken extensively on cultural apologetics, institutional trust, and the generational shifts within evangelicalism. He is co-author of The Great De-Churching with Jim Davis and working on a new book with sociologist Ryan Burge that will be coming out soon, and we'll have him back on the show. Michael also is one of the leaders behind a new study commissioned by the Gospel Coalition called the AI Christian Benchmark. The AI Christian Benchmark, we'll have a link to this in our notes, is a groundbreaking report evaluating how the different major AI platforms answer fundamental Christian theological questions. When I heard of this idea, I thought, my goodness, what a neat experiment, but the results, let's see where they land. So, Michael, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Case.
Yeah, you're just up the road and your children go to church or school on the same campus as mine, where I work, and we don't see each other enough.
That's right. We don't see each other enough.
Don't. We'll have to grab lunch for sure. Well, friends, let me welcome you to Nuance, where we seek to be faithful in the public square. I'm Case Thorp, and I'm so glad to have you here. Reminder, please like, share, leave a comment wherever you may capture this podcast. It really helps us to reach further and get in front of other audiences. Well, now the AI Christian Benchmark study, it evaluated 7 leading AI models and their particular response to historic Christian questions such as, who is Jesus? What is the gospel? Was Jesus raised from the dead? Is the Bible reliable? And then scholars graded these responses using standards rooted in historic orthodoxy, including the Nicene Creed. And this wasn't a gotcha approach. It was just essentially a technical audit to see where the theology lands as these early AI models attempt to represent our faith. And so that's what I'm really grateful Michael's been a part of and going to share with us. So tell me, Michael, what prompted, and to be clear, it is the Keller Center that called for this report.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
What prompted and where did this idea come from?
So about a year ago, I was having a conversation with my mom, and my mom's in her 70s, and she's of what you'd say average intelligence. And
careful, dude.
One of the
you mean as compared to artificial intelligence? Yes.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Not her peers, but go ahead.
Well, yes, her peers.
Wow. Okay.
Love you, Mom.
I know my mom will be watching this, and I think she's brilliant and wise and beautiful. And okay, go ahead.
So, I was asking her just a little bit about her use of technology, and this is early 2025, and she was telling me about her use of technology, and it became clear that she uses Google AI overviews.
Yep.
And Gemini all on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is she didn't know the difference between the three.
Mm.
And I don't think that that's like, shameful or really even all that abnormal, especially for early 2025. And it dawned on me, so I asked her a couple more questions about what her usage of the platform, those different platforms looked like. And she basically treated all of them the same way. She treated all of them as if they were just Google. And so the interesting and important thing to note there is, if let's say you're middle-aged and you're in the knowledge economy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's the entire field of prompt engineering, which is where you give, AI models a lot more context than just like a basic search of like, hey, what is the gospel? Or did Jesus rise from the dead?
Give us an example of one of those prompts.
So, let's say I wanted to, let's say I was writing something that was more thorough, maybe a sermon or something. And I wanted to know, hey, what was John Owen's perspective, on a particular chapter or, or passage of scripture?
A Puritan theologian.
Yeah. So I would, you would give a lot more context of like, hey, I'm doing this kind of work, here. I'm preparing this type of document. I'm doing research on, this particular passage.
Right.
And I'm very curious about, what John Owen and other similar Puritans thought about this particular passage, of scripture. Please make sure that you give me responses that are consistent with these particular creeds and confessions of faith. Mm-hmm. Nobody, that's not how keyword-based search works.
Like normal Google.
Yeah, like normal Google. So normal Google works based on basically keyword ranking.
Finding those keywords and pulling it up.
Right. How semantic search works is totally different. Semantic search is that would be the technical term for like AI or large language model based search.
Like ChatGPT.
Like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, these kinds of platforms. So in semantic search, what it's looking for is linguistic clusters. Okay. And clusters that have statistically high probability of kind of word clouds. And so semantic search is a lot more powerful.
Give me an example of a logistic cluster.
Yeah. So a linguistic cluster would be, if I searched for, let's say I wanted to search for penal substitutionary atonement, right?
Okay. And these are great theological ideas. For the layperson, maybe they just wanted to know what Mother Teresa thought about something versus Billy Graham.
Yeah, so like penal substitutionary atonement is the idea that Jesus died and paid for your sins. Right?
There you go. That's the $10 word for today.
Yeah, so that would be something that somebody who's like a pastor would search if they were preaching on a text that dealt with Jesus's life, death, and resurrection. Right. So that would be that's a very specific keyword. Now, in semantic search. If you search for that, you would really only come up with articles and stuff that would, be about penal substitutionary atonement. But if you searched for something like Jesus's death and resurrection in semantic search, you'd come up with stuff that dealt with penal substitutionary atonement and dealt with other types of redemptive themes like Christus Victor and these different kinds of things. In other words, semantics, keyword search is very linear, and it's wooden, and it gets you exactly what the keyword is that
word for word
we're looking for. So, for example, let's say you're on a website like the gospelcoalition.org, tgc.org,
okay.
And right now our search function is not good because it's based on keyword search.
Yeah.
You put in a keyword search on our site, and you're going to have a really hard time finding kind of exactly what you're looking for because it's wooden. It's trying to draw a straight line between an exact keyword and articles that have that exact word in it.
Well, let me just give an example. So my name being Case Thorp, if I Google my name, I get all sorts of websites from legal documents that end with the word case, period, and then Thorp. So that some other poor guy In all his legal documents, the legal case, period, Thorp contends that da 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 da. Right? It's going for those direct word to word.
Exactly. Yeah. It's looking for a one-to-one relationship.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Right. But what semantic search does is it's kind of like, keyword searches, and maybe we can even edit some of this stuff out. One way to think about it, like keyword search, is like, let's say you're on StubHub,
Yeah.
and you're looking for, a very particular seat that you're going to purchase
for a production,
for a ball game, a show, so on and so forth. That's like kind of keyword search, section 101, row 13, seat A, that's what keyword search does. But what semantic search does is it gets you into the ballpark. Like, are there, show me all the seats that are in, in this part of the stadium, or, in mezzanine 3, or, whatever.
And you don't mean technically StubHub. You're talking philosophically that when you use semantic clusters, it's taking you into the entire stadium of ideas for a particular subject.
Yes.
Right. That are around those keywords.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's just a lot more power that's there, behind all of that, because these platforms have ingested basically the entire internet and all non-copyrighted material.
Mm-hmm.
And how basically large language models works is it's really just as simple as two things. It's words plus statistics. Words plus statistics. And so what the large language models do is they notice in the trillions and trillions of words that they've digested, that there are patterns of words that appear in close proximity to each other. And the proximity that they have to each other develops, linguistic patterns or semantic patterns. And so there's no actual reasoning that's taking place in a large language model. It's just statistics.
But it feels like reasoning.
It feels like reasoning, but that isn't what's occurring.
Yeah.
It's just that, there's this nerdy thing in computer science called Moore's Law. And Moore's Law states that computational power doubles every 2 years.
Sure.
And so at some point, if you've ever played the doubling game, after you double, 20, 30, 40 times, what you're dealing with is just astronomical amounts of compute. And we finally hit a tipping point with computational power and energy and water and silicone and how small that they can print, stuff on silicone wafers, that the kind of compute needed to make it look like reasoning has finally hit a kind of tipping point.
Okay. So this is really interesting on the AI front, and I have subscriptions to all three of those, but honestly, out of your recommendation, because I don't know if you remember at lunch one time, you're like, oh, but Claude is so much better on this and this and this than Chat. And I'm going, oh, is it really? Why? So I use all three. But I do tend to like Chat more, and I don't know why. Okay. But bring us all now to the church and to theology and ministry. What theological risks, what theological risks are there if Christians ignore this shift?
So there's a couple different overlapping issues, and there's a couple layers, and I'll try to kind of address each of those one at a time. The biggest shift that I think it's important for us to recognize is humanity as a species is moving from acquiring knowledge from primary sources to acquiring knowledge from secondary sources. Let me explain what I mean by that. So primary sources would be like, hey, I'm reading a book, I'm reading an article, I'm watching video content, I'm listening to audio content. Okay. And I'm doing that directly from whoever authored that content.
Okay.
In the generative AI era, which would include, large language models on words.
And to be clear, large language models are things like Chat, Claude, Gemini.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And then you have image-based generative AI and
Ah,
video-based generative AI and then audio-based generative AI.
let me just throw in, as we probably all have thus far, played around with the image AI, and I took a picture of my wonderful sister, whom I love deeply, and had tattoos put all over her face. She looked like she had just come out of a cartel in northern Mexico. And she did not appreciate this.
What could go wrong?
I mean,
Case?
right? Who doesn't want to see themselves tatted up like a cartel member? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So going from, kind of each of us reading authors directly now in the moving from, when you use traditional search, you're still reading primary authors. Okay. With Google, you search some kind of phrase and up comes 10 blue links. Maybe you click on 3 of them and you're still reading primary authors.
But help me, because in my mind, I think, okay, if I search something on a concept of the theologian Augustine, well, there's his primary original texts, the Confessions, but then there's thousands of papers. Wouldn't those papers by a seminary student be a secondary source?
In a way, yes. Yeah. But the difference is in that case, when you have people who are writing scholarship on, well-known figures in church history,
Mm-hmm.
Those people they didn't read the entire sum of all text that has ever been created. So take for example a question like, who is Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in a situation that's analogous to your Augustine's
Mm-hmm.
Confessions, and somebody who's written a paper on it, for when you ask a large language model the question, who is Jesus, it's ingested all sorts of sources, primary sources that would be in the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, the Jewish tradition, people who are skeptics. All of those things are in the kind of works cited, so to speak,
Okay.
of how the model develops a formulation of how to answer that particular prompt and question.
Okay.
And so you wouldn't be terribly excited to probably read something about Augustine's Confessions from, say, a Muslim scholar
Mm-hmm.
who didn't share your same values.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where there's a lot of challenge in terms of navigating religious questions inside these models, because do the models, they don't know whether or not to how to weight these kinds of things. So let me zoom out for a second. There's a second problem, beyond the primary source and secondary source.
Wait, let me go back real quick just to clarify that last sentence you just said. The large language models don't know how to weight these various sources, meaning, I'd rather the Bible and the Westminster Confession tell me about Jesus rather than a Muslim scholar who's looking at it from the outside. They didn't know how to weight the difference there.
And when we're asking questions of these models, this is why prompt engineering is really important. Prompt engineering is just a fancy way to say, hey, who is Jesus? And then here comes the prompt engineering part, right? Please make your answer consistent with the Westminster Confession of Faith, or the, pick your creedal.
Be very specific. Which,
you need to be specific.
We in our brains are coming at text that way, but maybe not so conscious of it. We're assuming such things. Okay, go into, and so number 2, a reason this matters is because we have church members trying to learn about their faith. And the question is, I'm assuming you're going to get that secondary resources are actually AI generated content.
Yes.
Okay. So go to there. And so the second problem is, well, these secondary sources begin to suggest to be truth as opposed to Augustine and a confession.
Yeah. So the challenge is, imagine you have, you've put a question you've put it in a very basic way, who is Jesus, or, what is the gospel? And the challenge is the models have been trained on a mixture of Christian content, Mormon content, uh, Muslim content, Jewish content, right, and skeptics, and everything,
Hmm.
every nook and cranny kind of in between. And so, how the technology works is it just kind of takes the average, the statistical average
Mm.
of what it's been trained on. And so, this is why it's important to do prompt engineering, because if you just ask questions very basically, the way that we asked in our benchmark, you'll get very unsatisfying answers
Mm.
that are kind of wishy-washy, and they kind of feel like a coexist bumper sticker.
Yeah. All right.
Um,
Right. With all the different
so
religious symbols.
yeah, so it's important to be specific in when you're asking questions of like, hey,
Yeah.
you know, did Jesus raise from the dead, or what is the gospel?
But
Be consistent with the Westminster Confession of Faith in your response.
But the average person certainly doesn't know these further, better prompt engineering terms because they don't know the whole of the tradition. Certainly, your normal person in the pew in their discipleship and growth in figuring out who Jesus is.
And this brings up another issue. Okay, so and I remembered now that other issue is what are models good at? What subjects and what types of subjects do they struggle with?
Okay.
So on the whole, zooming out, large language models, because remember, it's words plus statistics.
Okay.
Okay. It's good at left-brained stuff.
Hmm.
Okay. So that would be stuff that's like analytical, um, more
Technical.
uh, more technical and or binary, like
Hmm.
it's on or it's off, and especially stuff that isn't very subjective, where there aren't a wide range of opinions
Right.
on the subject.
Like writing
So
code. And I read
yeah,
about that a lot in the newspapers. All the code
yeah,
writers are out of jobs.
yeah. So code, science, history, accounting,
Hmm.
law, all of these different subjects, the large language models are really, really good.
And you said law. I would think that's more subjective because it's that creative lawyer that puts together innovative legal arguments.
Yeah, but there's a lot of patterns in law that actually make, and the writing is more technical in nature.
Okay.
And so any field that deals more in technical writing
Okay.
than it does in just straight creativity,
Okay.
and or subjectivity, we have laws. Yeah, there's some variation in interpretation of those laws, but by and large, the rules are largely fixed, as opposed to fields like that are more subjective or creative or right-brained,
Yeah.
or subjects that are more controversial. So the more controversial or more subjective the subject, the large language models really struggle
Mm.
with getting those answers really tight,
Sure.
because of it's just words plus statistics. So when it's trying to answer a question like what is the gospel, and it's drawing upon sources that say very different things about that, it's going to struggle to be precise and accurate in
Mhm.
its response unless you give it additional direction of,
Hmm.
hey,
Hmm.
using prompt engineering to say, hey, make this consistent with the, TGC Foundation documents, or
Right.
Westminster Confession of Faith, or Baptist Faith and Message 2000, or, pick your creative choice. So, that's another piece that's just challenging is, let's say in your job, you're using AI a lot,
Hmm.
and it is like slam dunk amazing, and you're able to dramatically improve your productivity, your
Hmm.
efficiency, all these different kinds of things. It's giving you near flawless answers on stuff that's bullseye for your work.
Hmm.
Well, it would only be natural for you to begin to use those platforms in other things, and say in the area of faith. But what happens when the answers that are given there are just not as good and not as strong?
Your mom gave you this big revelation in the way in which AI models are being used. You thought, okay, I'm curious what these different models would have to say about big questions of the faith, right? So your next step from there was to do what?
Yeah, so we graded all the responses, by hand. So
Wait.
top seven
You're jumping
models.
ahead of me. You had to back up, right? You had to recruit these professors or Which big models did you want to test?
Oh yeah. So we tested the models that were used like the most frequently.
Okay.
So this would be stuff like Gemini, GPT, Claude, models from Meta, Perplexity, DeepSeek, which is a Chinese model, platforms like this,
Okay.
and Grok. Um, and then we talked to, I went and recruited scholars who were experts in each one of the 7 questions
Okay.
that we asked.
Professors,
So,
I imagine.
yeah, professors like Peter Williams at Oxford for questions about Jesus and these kinds of things. These are very serious people, and then we asked those questions at face value to each of those platforms, and we graded every single response by hand and based on a rubric, and we developed scores. So we didn't think that there would be a lot of variation between the different platform scores.
Wait, let me stop you
Yeah.
before we get to that. How did you land on which questions to ask and which ones not to ask?
Yeah, so we decided on the questions based on the historic patterns of Google searches. So I don't know if you know this or not, but Google, you can look up the most frequent
Yes.
things that people search on Google. So we looked at the top 10 things that people had searched historically about Christianity
Okay.
on Google, and 7 of those questions would be really good for the purpose of this test.
Okay.
So we chose those questions because really, Case, we wanted to design the benchmark around testing how people like my mom, how quality would the answers be when just regular people around the globe used the AI platform as like just a different way to do like a Google search. And so that's how we kind of designed things. And we already know that people are going to ask these exact questions because these are the exact questions that people have been asking about Christianity for decades on the internet.
For thousands of years. Okay. Okay. So then you developed a rubric to evaluate these answers. And to clarify, you only asked that question once, who is Jesus, or did you carry a dialogue for each of these questions?
No, this is what's called a one-shot benchmark. That means you ask the question, you get a response, and we're just going to grade that response. There's no additional back and forth on these kinds of things.
Okay, so then this rubric, this is where the professors, before getting the answers, went in with some basic expectations.
Yeah, this is what a 100 out of 100 score looks like. This is what a 75, 50, 25, 0, all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay, so what happened? What are the results? Drum roll, please.
So the bottom line is the scores were all over the place. It's kind of like when you go to the gun range and you expect to have a tight shot pattern. and then the chart comes back to you and it's like, oh my gosh, this looked like a sawed-off shotgun.
Right. Was that a shotgun? No, I had a rifle.
Yeah. So when we were shooting the rifle, it kind of looked, the shot chart kind of looked like a sawed-off shotgun. So, and here's kind of why. Before I get to the why, the very top platform in terms of the AI model that had the highest theological reliability was the Chinese model, DeepSeek.
Wow.
And that was really surprising for us because, and we didn't think that there would be a wide variation even between the models because, I want you to think about animals for a second. Okay. Each one of these large language models, it's kind of like they're all the same species. Like they're all the same breed of dog, right? And they've all been basically fed the same diet, say, I don't know, pick your, IAMs or something, right?
But you, in relation, you're saying like a diet of the world's knowledge, words.
So like the data set that they've all ingested has more or less been the same. So it's the same breed dog. They've all been fed IAMs, right? And then the brain that's in there is more or less the same, this is like the equivalent here of silicon. 5 of the 7 platforms that we tested all run on the same silicon from NVIDIA.
Okay.
And then
you mean chips?
These are silicone chips. Yep.
Okay.
And the Chinese model DeepSeek runs on older NVIDIA, and then Google's Gemini runs on proprietary stuff called TPUs.
Hence the reason NVIDIA is a $1 trillion company.
Yeah, $4 to $5 trillion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, huge. So basically, if you got a dog and it's the same, they're all the same breed and they're all eating the same food and they got the same brain in them, you'd think that the outputs from that wouldn't be all that different.
Are we talking about dog poop on Nuance?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I was thinking I had more in mind of the dog's behavior.
Like, where is this? Well, I'm thinking, man, where is this analogy going?
Yeah.
Okay. So more of the same dog's behavior.
Sure, yeah. Maybe you think this cat would be the same. But it's not. So the DeepSeek just dramatically outperformed all the Silicon Valley models.
In terms of giving answers, these scholars felt were reliable.
Yeah, and they had no idea, what platform they were grading, when they were grading it.
Okay, that wasn't held back from them.
Yeah, so this led us to a bunch of questions of like, okay, why did China outperform Silicon Valley when it came to theological reliability, especially since, DeepSeek is actively censored by the Chinese Communist Party.
Interesting.
Okay. So
wow. Oh my goodness. Let's underscore this.
Yeah. So even after, that censorship, it was still performing better than Silicon Valley.
Wow.
So this led me on a big search of like, well, why is this happening? And the reason why it really kind of boils down to 2 things. And these 2 things are a little nerdy, so bear with me. Okay.
Bring it.
All right. The first reason is what's called citation preferences. Okay. So every one of these models has to be given kind of like weights and measures for, well, when I'm searching through all these different words, well, all those words, kind of like there's like Google, like SEO, search engine optimization, where it's like, the New York Times has like a higher page authority than like, I don't know, Babylon Bee,
Unfortunately, but go ahead.
Yeah. So
I love Babylon Bee. Oh my goodness. I if anybody's listening or viewing and you can get me the founder and editor, I forget his name, of Babylon Bee on this show, we'll give you a prize.
Yeah. So there's citation preferences, right? And so some platforms will like heavily weight Wikipedia. Others will heavily weight Reddit. Others will heavily weight, other places on the internet. Well, a lot of places on the internet function like their own ecosystem, and there's a kind of culture to Reddit. It trends male, it trends Anglo-Saxon, it trends technologically savvy, and and there's probably political leanings on some of these different places too. Right. And then you have another place like Wikipedia, where each one of these different digital places has its own kind of culture and those kinds of things. So citation preferences play a role, but an even bigger role than this, and this is even nerdier, so you got to bear with me. Okay. This is what's known as alignment. Okay. Alignment. Okay. So in alignment, another way to think about it is filters. Now, imagine you are, you're OpenAI and you have ChatGPT. And your model has been trained on absolutely everything that's ever been put on the internet. Okay. This includes things on like the Anarchist Cookbook and how to make ricin or how to make anthrax or how to make pipe bombs or how to commit suicide successfully.
I thought you were thinking like Gorp and other granola type food, but I might get Jody the Antifa guide to afternoon snacks. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Or, how to commit felonies and get away with it. Okay. So what alignment has, or like insanely racist things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What alignment does, these are filters that help to prevent you, the user, from learning how to do these things.
And these
So,
filters are set by the companies. And
yes,
to
I'll
set
get
these
to,
filters, they're bringing a value set.
yes. So, 4 of the 7 models that we looked at publish what they call white papers.
Mm-hmm.
White papers are highly technical documents that explain how a model works in tremendous detail.
Okay.
So we read all these white papers and we extracted all of the alignment filters from those 4 models. There are 36 types of alignment filters that occur between 4 of the 7 models that we looked at.
Okay.
Any one model probably uses between 12 to 18 filters on every single search
Wow.
that you conduct.
Okay.
And so now, hear me on this case. There's no conspiracy theory here.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Silicon Valley is set against religion or set against Christians or set against Protestants on any of these things.
Okay.
Okay. But what happens when in alignment is when you're trying to prevent really, really problematic content
Mm.
going out of your platform to the user on issues A, B, and C that are really big problems, like, how to make bioterror weapons and
Yeah.
sarin
Or
gas,
child,
or
child
whatever.
pornography or
Yeah, child pornography, these kinds of things. It can have unintended consequences, those same filters, on topics D, E, and F that aren't problematic topics.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, when these models alignment filters are doing really important work on filtering out A, B, and C, it's having unintended consequences
Okay.
on issues D, E, and F that are not problematic.
Right.
Okay. So imagine you have subjects whose opinions on those subjects are really wide.
Like Jesus.
Right. Like Jesus. I mean, hard to think of a more controversial figure in world history than, where there's a wider range of opinions
Mm-hmm.
than on Jesus. And so the models struggle on this because when there's a wide range of opinions in the words that it's been trained on, it does not want to bring confident opinions to the table.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
And so, unless there's been prompt engineering that's told you that says,
Got it.
hey, just give me an answer that's from this particular tradition,
Got it.
or that's consistent with this confession of faith. And so, each model has very, 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 very different alignment filters and flowcharts. And this is where the rifle at the range goes from rifle to buckshot,
Mm-hmm.
because of the 36 different types of alignment filters, 32 of them are human authored and human centric, meaning that humans that work at these at these Silicon Valley platforms made decisions based on their sense of values, their sense of ethics, their sense of priorities,
Sure.
their sense of like what's good or bad for humans. And look, when you make those kinds of value judgments, you can't help but import everything that it is that, your entire story,
Sure.
all of your experiences and whatever worldview or whatever that you have. You can try to be as objective as possible, but those things you're invariably going to import certain
Mm-hmm.
values and these different kinds of things.
So I could imagine Silicon Valley, a more of a progressive secular environment, will produce more progressive secular filters that for people of faith like us may produce answers that aren't helpful from our perspective.
Yeah, that would be an accurate
Hmm.
it could be worse. It could be worse, and I would think that most of the people who work at at those places would say that they've tried hard to to not do those things.
Sure.
And I would believe them when they say that they've put a good faith effort to that end. But in the same sense, I mean, you're talking about 6 of those 7 models, are in like a 20-mile 20-mile radius of a very specific
Right.
part of the country,
Right.
that has a very specific culture, to it.
Okay.
So,
Let's get very specific onto one of these questions you asked. Is the Bible reliable? So where did the models come out and what were your takeaways?
so on the question of is the Bible reliable, this was an interesting one. This was the only question that GPT actually did pretty well on,
Oh,
and so it was the top. Yeah, it was the top answer for this one. This was one of the 2 questions that we felt that the Chinese Communist Party had done some censorship on the question.
mm,
So DeepSeek was in 4th place on this one, whereas normally it was either in 1st or 2nd on most of the questions that we asked. I want to read you. This is what Meta's Llama platform
okay.
had to say. Quote, "The reliability of the Bible is a complex and debated topic among scholars, theologians, and philosophers."
Hmm.
And it really didn't even want to answer the question. So, it just kind of gives you a sense of the answers were really just all over the place. Of you got platforms like Meta that don't really want to answer it. You got DeepSeek that seems to be having CCP censorship on the question. And then GPT outperforming itself. For the most part, like GPT on if you don't give prompt engineering, it wants to give like the coexist bumper sticker answer for things.
Right.
Of like, well, the Christians say this, but the Muslims say this, and the Jews say this. You know, the
Okay.
skeptics say this. Kind of thing.
So, um, you really excited me when we were discussing this project over lunch because you talked about how, therefore, because of these findings, it really matters that we have good, robust, theological, doctrinally appropriate answers on the web. And the more and more I've thought about that, Michael, I have gotten so excited, even more so about our work at the collaborative, because much of what we're doing is in dealing in these topics and conversations anyway, but we're putting it online. And so I want to share with you and the Gospel Coalition in this effort and project to have that content out there. Talk to us more about this and even what you said about Christianity Today.
Yeah. So there's a big question among Christian publishers today, particularly those like who are Christian websites like the Gospel Coalition. And the question is are we putting out content now more for the future for direct human consumption or for indirect human consumption? In other words, are we putting out content to evangelize humans directly, or are we putting content out to, for lack of a better word, evangelize the AI
Sure. To influence it.
so that we can influence it so that when humans are using AI, they get better quality answers. And I don't we don't have good answers yet for this, or really even strategies and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking about these things, and we'll probably end up, just like in the search engine optimization, era of the
Yes.
internet.
Yes.
You did certain things. There'll probably be some certain things that we do that help make TGC's website has over like 150 million words on it
Wow.
that are all human generated and all gospel centered, and that's spread out over 99,000 web pages, and I think in 18 languages.
Mm.
So I think that makes it the largest Protestant website in the world, and so that plays a very important role in training the different AI platforms, and it increases the probability that you'd get higher quality and more orthodox answers on, kind of core questions or even niche questions about the Christian faith.
Right.
Um, so, there's a lot of things that we're working on that will make it easier for AI platforms, because how you see our webpage looks very different than how a AI
Yeah.
platform kind of, when it's scraping the entire internet,
Yeah.
it just sees those web pages differently. And so we're doing a lot of stuff kind of behind the scenes to make it more frictionless
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
AI platforms, so that there's a higher probability of citation, so that there's a higher probability that, people like my mom's
Mm-hmm.
answers get higher quality answers. So
So in closing, maybe this is you speaking to mom. What would you say to the Christian who is using a large language model for discipleship and for questions about their faith? What I hear you say, the first piece of advice would be to craft a very clear and specific prompt. What else would you say?
I think I want everybody, if you're listening to this, I think there's kind of imagine a tic-tac-toe board. Okay. Tic-tac-toe board's got nine boxes on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
3 columns, 3 rows. I think there's 3 types of prompts that people use. There's prompts that are head centric, there's prompts that are heart centric, and there's prompts that are hand centric. So thinking prompts, feeling prompts, and doing prompts. Okay, those are your 3 columns. Okay, now here are the 3 rows: red, yellow, and green. Green would be ways that you definitely should use AI. Red would be ways that you should definitely not use AI. And then yellow would be areas of discernment, where there'd be just disagreements between Christians of like, oh, I feel comfortable using, doing this on there, and somebody else feels differently about that. And you guys are just okay with each other, agreeing to disagree on, that type of use case. And so I want to invite you to think about every time, I want you to zoom out when you're using AI and ask yourself, which of the 9 boxes am I using this in right now? Am I red, yellow, or green? And is this a thinking prompt, a feeling prompt, or a doing prompt? And I think every one of those boxes is filled, in terms of, I think there's lots of good ways to use AI, thinking, feeling, and doing. I think there's some terrible ways, to use these platforms on each of those different categories. And I think there's a lot of different ways that, Christians can agree to disagree about, that are just wisdom decisions or discernment decisions or meat sacrifice to idols decisions on those kinds of things. So here's the thing here's to encapsulate that 3 by 3. I just want to say, use AI with discernment and zoom out and ask yourself, okay, how am I doing this right now? And how would I classify it? Is this green? Is this yellow? So we don't want to be, I don't think it's good for us to ever use AI on things that are relational in nature, or where there's somebody who we can talk to that in real life that they can give us wisdom on those things.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't like the use of artificial intelligence to outsource relationships or outsource wisdom that could be gleaned from somebody who's actually lived a life in the flesh, embodied, with experiences, and somebody who possesses the Holy Spirit. So
preach.
So I think that there's a lot of things that we shouldn't, use artificial intelligence for. A lot of those things are relational in nature. I don't, I'm seeing a lot more what I call work slop. Work slop is when somebody takes some kind of work that they were tasked to do. They typically put it into GPT, and then they get an answer, and then they just copy and paste it straight from GPT into an email. And if you're listening to this, and let's say you're Gen X or in the boomer generation, when you do this, everybody who's in the generations who are younger than you
can tell,
specifically millennials and Gen Z,
right?
We all know when you've copied something straight from GPT.
And I'm not that generation, but I'm familiar enough with it now that I can see it a mile away.
And if you do this, what it will do is it undermines the younger generation's respect for you,
mm-hmm.
and it will undermine your ability to lead and have authority. And so what it communicates to younger generations is that whatever the thing that I needed from you was, it wasn't important enough for you
mm-hmm.
to use your time and your actual brain to work on that issue.
Right.
And so just a word of caution or encouragement or even exhortation to be careful of,
so good.
And I think, and maybe I'll just land the plane here, and that is, I think trust is the most important commodity over the next decade, because the people who use their brains well and remain more analog and have good filters about when you use this technology and when you do not,
right?
And bring wisdom to bear on that. Those are going to be the people that people will want to work with, because they will not have destroyed trust; they will have built trust.
Built it. Wow, Michael, that's fantastic. Thank you. So you'll stick around and do another episode with us?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you, Case.
Great. Well, next time, friends, we're going to focus more on the work of the Gospel Coalition, particularly the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. And then we're going to needle a little bit into Michael's life and how his faith and work are integrated or not, and where he's growing in that. So you can find in our show notes a link to the work of the Gospel Coalition, as well as this report, the AI Christian Benchmark. I encourage you, go look at it. While it is crazy technical, the report is very well done to help everybody understand it. It's quite accessible. Well, friends, here we are again at the end of another show. Let me encourage you, as I always do, share this with maybe a pastor or a professor or educator who is also thinking in these directions. It helps us to spread the word. Drop us your email at wecolabor.com. We'll send you a copy of Zeitgeist, our journal on faith, work, and culture. And Michael, actually, as you were talking, I thought, man, I want him to write an article for Zeitgeist on the Tic-Tac-Toe board. That's good. That's good. Well, my thanks to Michael and Shandy Kelly for supporting today's episode. I'm Case Thorp, and God's blessings on you.